On tonight's edition of Politicat, Peach State politics, the Georgia House race that may show us what to expect in 2018. Pressure in Pyongyang, tensions on the Korean Peninsula grow heated. And all about Jared Kushner and Bannon jockey for power. All that and more on Politicat, your politics right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm your host, Fallon Gallagher, and later we'll be joined by our panel, Adam Gross, former head of NU Students for Brian Miller, and Dominic Baer, Secretary of Events for College Republicans. But first, today's headlines. British Prime Minister Theresa May called today for a general election on June 8th, a move that surprised many since May stated several times that she would not call a snap election before the next scheduled one in 2020. May claims the opposition party, a Liberal coalition led by Jeremy Corbyn, is preventing Parliament from separating Britain from the European Union. This separation, called Brexit, is the result of a referendum called by previous Prime Minister David Cameron in June of 2016. May's Conservative Party holds a narrow majority over the Liberal coalition. It is having trouble negotiating Brexit due to the Conservative guidelines set in place by Cameron. Winning a snap election would give her the mandate she needs to fully extricate the UK from the European Union. And President Trump signed an executive order instructing government immigration officials to review and tighten the H-1B visa program, which provides visas for temporary foreign workers. The executive order, coined the Buy American and Hire American order, was signed at the Kenosha, Wisconsin factory of the tool company Snap-on. Critics are questioning the consistency of Trump's order in light of the fact that many of his own products are manufactured overseas. And the federal government is heading for another government shutdown in 10 days. When Congress returns from the recess on Monday, it will have to pass funding legislation for federal programs before the deadline on the 28th. This year, the process will be complicated by the president's threat that he will stop federal reimbursements for insurance companies, a vital part of the Affordable Care Act. Democrats are not expected to pass a budget that would defund the ACA, setting a stage for another showdown which would freeze payments for federal employees. It would also repeat the events of 2013, the last shutdown, which was also caused by disagreements over the ACA. And polls have just closed in Georgia's 6th district, where a special election was held to fill the House seat vacated by Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. There are 18 candidates running for the seat, 11 of whom are Republican, 2 of whom are independent, and 5 of whom are Democrats. One of those Democrats has attracted considerable support and money. Jon Ossoff, a 30-year-old CEO of an investigative documentary company and native of North DeKalb County, has reportedly raised upwards of $8.3 million, far more than any other candidate in the race. One of the reasons Ossoff has raised so much is that Democrats see this race as a signifier for the future of the Democratic Party. The result of this county of Georgia may show how the midterm elections in 2018 will go. Will the Democrats ride the anti-Trump fervor to victory, or will reliably red Georgia County stay red? Let's ask our panel. Joining us now are Adam Gross, formerly the Brian Miller for Evanston campaign and currently the ASG off-campus senator, and Dominic Baer, party leader of the right from the political union and Secretary of Events for College Republicans. Adam, Dominic, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
First off, so this election isn't in Trump County. The president barely beat Hillary Clinton in District 6 by 1 percentage point. What could this seat mean for the two parties?
I think this race is in part a referendum on Trump's popularity, but I think that's kind of what has fueled Ossoff's rise. But I think what's eventually going to determine this race is this is a reliably red district. This is a conservative district. This is a district that has conservative roots where Secretary Price won by 30 points in November. And I think those kind of demographic trends and kind of the consistency in voting Republican of the district are going to eventually make sure that a Republican's going to win this race.
And Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not positive who's going to win the race. I think one thing that's going to hurt the Republicans here is the sheer number of candidates that are in the race. So it's pretty likely that Jon Ossoff is almost definitely going to advance to the next round, and there will be one other Republican. But but I think there should have been a little bit more consolidation on their end if they wanted to be competitive. And I think that the absolute ridiculousness that is the Trump presidency will get more people out to vote, and I think there's definitely a chance that Ossoff can pull it out. And what just happened in Kansas, I think, also bodes well for him.
So the race has turned to the White House. Democrat Jon Ossoff has negatively attacked Trump and his campaign ads. And the president also weighed in on the race via Twitter, calling Ossoff a, quote, super liberal Democrat who wants to protect criminals, allow illegal immigration, and raise taxes. So how will national politics affect this race, and how predictive are special elections for the upcoming midterms? What do you think, Adam?
Well, I think if you've watched some Jon Ossoff's recent interviews, while he has definitely criticized the Trump administration, he has stopped short of criticizing him for some things. So he hasn't responded when he was asked about Neil Gorsuch and that nomination, because I think he's aware that 51% of the district he's running in just voted for Trump. But what's going on in national politics is definitely going to play a huge part of what happens in this district. And I think there's no question about that. And Trump's popularity ratings are abysmal for a president at this time in their term. So definitely.
I think national politics is definitely playing an impact. And Ossoff's popularity is due in great part because of him trying to run as an anti-Trump candidate. But I think essentially all politics is local. And that's what's going to eventually determine that a Republican's going to win in this race, because these people, the people in the 6th district, are conservatives, and despite disliking Trump, they're going to eventually coalesce against a conservative, in favor of a conservative candidate who's going to beat Ossoff.
Well, the race that this 6th district is known as, it's a jungle primary, and with its 18 candidates vying to advance. What does this mean for the overall political climate of today?
I think that we're going to learn here that people don't want their Social Security cut, they don't want Medicaid cut, they don't want Medicare cut, and Donald Trump promised not to cut those things, and that is not what's happening right now. And so I think that we're going to really learn, hopefully in this election, that even people who did vote for Trump, and even some people who do identify as conservative or who lean that way, don't want these incredibly important programs that help people on a day-to-day basis taken away.
I think those facts just don't hold for the 6th district. This is a district that has elected Secretary Price for the last few years, and who chose to vote for him by a margin of 30%. And Price was in his time in Congress one of the leading proponents of cuts to Medicaid and to Social Security. This is a district that has kind of established conservative roots. These are people who are kind of grassroots conservatives who really believe in conservatism, and that's kind of one of the reasons they didn't kind of swing behind Trump so strongly, because Trump was kind of running on a populist message.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the same time, these are incredibly popular programs amongst everybody. And 538 did a recent thing where they said that there are 46 seats that are more likely Democratic leaning than this district. So yes, it's pretty conservative, but it's not all the way to the right.
So as of now, we have some numbers. It looks like that the leader is Ossoff with 60% of the vote, but only 2% of the precincts are reporting. Do you guys think this is surprising?
I think this isn't surprising at all. If we look at the example set by the Kansas district, the Kansas 4th district, Democrats were leading heavily based on the early vote because they were able to get more people to turn out. And I think this is a reflection of the same thing. Kind of Democrats are more engaged, more passionate about this race. But I think eventually his margin is inevitably going to decrease by a lot. And I think he's going to end up more around the 40% he's been polling.
So to follow up with that, we have Karen Handel is the second person in this race right now, and she's floating around 14% of the vote. This is the Republican candidate. Do we think that we're going to see a considerable increase in her vote?
I think definitely we're going to see an increase in her vote as time goes on tonight. She is a very established, well-established candidate, very popular in Georgia. She's Secretary of State. And I think she's definitely going to be polling probably around 20% by the end of the night. And in a runoff, the Republican Party is going to coalesce around her. We're going to see outside groups coming in to spend to help her.
How do you see this panning out?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The 60% number is definitely going to go down as expected, that Democrats would be ahead with early voting. And I think it'll end up around 42, 43% as well.
Well, stay tuned for more Politicat after the break. Yesterday, Vice President Mike Pence announced to CNN that the Trump administration will abandon its passive foreign policy towards North Korea. While Pence, quote, hopes to resolve issues peacefully, he foreshadowed increased diplomatic and economic pressures towards North Korea. Pence called on the other Pacific Rim countries, including Japan, South Korea, and China, to help take action against the nuclear-capable dictatorship. Back in the U.S., President Trump echoed this sentiment, stating that the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, has, quote, gotta behave. North Korea issued a proclamation saying that it viewed the statements as aggressive and possible catalyst for thermonuclear war. Since the president's inauguration, North Korea has been aggressive in its nuclear proliferation efforts. This month, the country test-fired 2 ICBMs, 1 successful. So, North Korea has escalated its testing of ICBMs. Is this a cause of concern, or is it just simply an empty gesturing from the country? What do you think, Dominic?
This is definitely a big cause of concern. Having a dictator as brutal and paranoid as Kim Jong-un owning nuclear weapons is definitely a cause for concern, especially given the strategic location of South Korea and Japan and the potential for destruction that this could cause. So I think I'm really glad of the hard line that the Trump administration has had here after the failure of the strategic patience from the Obama administration. And I think taking a hard line against this will let us negotiate from a position of strength to prevent Kim Jong-un from owning nuclear weapons.
Adam, are you as concerned as Dominic?
Oh, absolutely. I think a couple days ago it looked as if, a future war with North Korea is not completely out of the question at all. And it's really concerning. I'm extremely concerned with the way Trump is handling the situation, especially after, he met with the leader of China and said, North Korea is a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be. It took about 10 minutes for him to explain it all to me. And first of all, he was listening to the leader of China on this issue, and that is not who we should be listening to on this. And I'm a little bit surprised after campaigning on calling China a currency manipulator and all these other aggressive things, that he's now listening to China's advice on how to deal with North Korea. Whereas I think the actual solution is not military, but it is pressuring China because China is the main trade partner and basically the only trade partner of North Korea. So China actually needs to be pressured so that they can kind of affect their trade with North Korea, because that's really the only thing that's going to bring real change.
Dominic, what do you think about that meeting with China?
That's precisely what Trump is doing. We're talking with China. China is the main strategic player in the region, and they have a great control over North Korea, as you've said, kind of economic links. And we've been trying to kind of talk to them and see what we can do, and they've proved willing to negotiate with us. And because for them, having a nuclear North Korea is definitely very dangerous. And I think the Trump administration has reached out, and they want to build an alliance with South Korea, with Japan, with China to try to address this problem.
Well, how do you propose that the president go about dealing with North Korea now on?
We need to form a coalition. We need to negotiate from a position of strength. So we need to kind of have North Korea, their best option be to negotiate with us. The problem with the Obama administration policy was North Korea didn't have an incentive to negotiate. And what Trump is, he's kind of showing North Korea, if you don't negotiate with us, if you don't give up those nuclear weapons, we're going to punish you for that. You're going to pay for that. And that's very necessary, because if we don't do something right now, they're going to develop nuclear weapons. That's going to be a gigantic hazard from now onwards.
So do you think that the president should tread lightly or keep up this aggressive posturing?
I don't think it's necessarily a question of treading lightly or being aggressive. I think it's about being smart and balanced. And I don't think anything that Donald Trump does has to do with his personal ideology or what's in the best interest of the country, but I think it has to do with his own ego and how he thinks he's going to be perceived. And things like military strikes, those are things that tend to bring the country together and do tend to bring bipartisan support. And I think for him it has a lot more to do with his ego, and I'm extremely concerned with somebody like that making any forms of military decisions.
So as of right now, it's been estimated that North Korea may be able to develop a full nuclear warhead that could be deployed against South Korea, Japan, or even the west coast of this country by 2020. How do you think that the United States should address this now in 2017?
Well, as I said before, I think it completely has to do with putting pressure on the Chinese. I don't think it has to do with having these friendly discussions with the leader of China, because why are we listening to China about this? There's no reason to listen to them. What we have to be doing is pressuring them to change their trade agreements and their trade policy towards North Korea, because applying military action is extremely dangerous to the Japanese, to the South Koreans. It could kill tons of innocent people. And in addition to that, we know that regime change does not work out. Taking out a dictator does not work out. What's that going to end us up with? Probably China taking it back over, or some other form of violent ruler coming into power. So that's not our solution.
Do you think that the United States should take some sort of military action, or what kind of plan do you foresee?
We need to kind of threaten North Korea with military action. War should always be the last resort, and that's why we're talking to China, because they are the main strategic player in the region. They are the people who can put the most pressure on North Korea.
But if you don't mind if I interrupt, do you think a threat is going to help if you don't think that military action is actually the solution?
Military action is always the last solution. It's the solution when you don't have any other options left. We're offering North Korea the option to negotiate with us, to give up their nuclear weapons. But if they don't want to negotiate, we're going to eventually need to strike them. We need a preemptive strike if they don't want to negotiate it. And having that threat is going to bring them to the negotiating table.
So it just came out today that a fleet of warships, including an aircraft carrier, USS Carl Vinson, which was reportedly sailing towards the Korean peninsula, was actually sailing away. This is the same fleet that President Trump a week ago called, quote, an armada. Does this mistake or a misrepresentation of this scale hurt our objectives in this region?
I don't think we have enough information to know what's really going on with the fleet. Only the Department of Defense and the Department of State actually know what's going on in like the kind of the Trump administration themselves. The media has just been publishing this fact. We don't know what's going on. I think the people in charge know what's going on, and I think we just need to wait and see what's going on with the fleet.
But the issue here is the fact that he called it an armada. What do you think about that?
He was trying to kind of project an aggressive tone to force the North Koreans to the negotiating table. Yeah, so I don't think.
Well, what do you think about this armada that we've seen?
I think everything the Trump administration does has to do with distractions and getting people to look at things while they're doing other things. So I don't know. It's very hard to believe anything they say. I'm tempted to say some of the people in charge, our military, the people who have actually been in this for a long time, yeah, a lot of them know what they're doing. The Trump administration, I don't know how we could possibly trust, as you said, that they know what they're doing. I don't know where your trust in that comes from.
So do you think that this misrepresentation is going to hurt our objectives in this Asian area?
Yeah, I do.
I don't think we know enough to know what's really going on with the fleet, and we can't jump to conclusions and say it's going to harm us right now.
Well, we may not know enough right now, but we'll have more for you as this story unfolds. We'll take a break, and we'll be back with more Politicat. The New York Times and other outlets are reporting about rumors of President Trump saying his famous words, "You're fired," to Chief Strategist Steve Bannon this week. This comes after several interviews with Mr. Trump downplaying Bannon's role in the administration and the campaign. The former Breitbart editor was also removed from the National Security Council earlier this month. Jared Kushner, son-in-law and advisor to the president, is said to be the driving force in an attempt to get Bannon out of the White House. Kushner and Bannon have had clear tensions in the past weeks. The two had a meeting last Friday, and Trump told them to, quote, work it out. The administration reported that the meeting went well and that the two advisors had a good talk. Now, coming off of these reports, Adam, do you think that this friendliness will remain, or will Bannon and Kushner continue to have hostility in the White House?
Well, I don't think this friendliness exists at all. Ideologically, these two are not on the same page. There's evidence that Bannon has said some anti-Semitic things in the past. I don't think Kushner would be a big fan of that as an Orthodox Jew himself. And yeah, they're ideologically opposed, and Bannon is somebody who craves a lot of power, and if he's not getting that, I don't see how they could possibly work their differences out between the two of them.
Dominic, do you think the hostility is going to continue?
Yeah, I must say I'm inclined to agree with Adam. The differences that we've seen here aren't really going to go away. Bannon talking behind Kushner's back and with some very insulting comments. And I think if Trump has to pick between Kushner and Ivanka and Bannon, he's inevitably going to go with his family. So I think inevitably we're going to see that Bannon's going to be leaving. Maybe not in the next couple of weeks, but eventually he's going to leave.
So you agree with this week's Saturday Night Live skit. So you mentioned ideologically, Kushner and Bannon what are their differences, and how do these differences factor into the Trump presidency?
Well, Steve Bannon is Mr. Alt-Right, and he ran the Breitbart website, which is the hub for the alt-right, which has a very nationalist, white nationalist viewpoint, less involved around the world militarily, trade policies that are much more aggressive, that would, anti-TPP, things of that nature. But yeah, he's really the leader of what is really a white supremacist group of people. There's really no other way of putting it.
So how do you think that these differences are going to factor into the Trump administration?
I think right now what we're seeing is kind of a little bit of a pivot from Trump. He is becoming a little bit more of a traditional conservative in many routes, and that would mean that he would abandon Bannon. It would also mean that he would abandon Kushner, who seems more centrist than necessarily conservative.
Do you think he could abandon Kushner with him being the son-in-law?
No, definitely not. I think Ivanka he has said some disgusting sexual things about her, but I think that family is very close, and I see no reason where that's going to go anywhere. No.
Dominic, what do you think about these ideological differences? Do you think that they're going to really strongly affect the Trump administration?
I think there's definitely been a change in the tone and the policies being pushed by the Trump administration. You've seen kind of an abandonment of the America First nationalistic Bannon agenda that's been pushed by Bannon and other people in the alt-right. And you've seen kind of more embrace of traditional neoliberal or conservative policies being pushed by people like Vice President Mike Pence, who represents kind of the conservative wing, and by people like Jared Kushner or Gary Cohn, who are more kind of liberal establishment people.
So we were talking earlier about Trump's family. Trump seems to be, he ran his businesses with his family. He seems to be running the White House with his family. And also with Ivanka and Kushner are heavily involved as advisors. So how do you think that this unprecedented family aspect, what do you think about it? Do you think it's helping or hurting this new administration?
I think it's wrong. I think if anything, it seems like Kushner is the voice of reason on a relative basis in his ear. So on that sense, it's helpful. At the same time, there's just a ton of conflicts of interests here. I mean, we saw that China afforded a couple trademarks to Ivanka the same day that Trump met with the leader of China. And there's a number of other things that just mean family should not be your main advisors in cabinet when you're the president of the United States.
Okay, but let's flip this. Let's say Hillary Clinton had won in November and Chelsea Clinton was in the White House with her husband. Do you think that would be okay? Do you think, how would that be different?
If Chelsea Clinton divested from any business interests and had a role in the White House where she wasn't being asked to have top-level security clearance, I think that's a lot different than what Trump is asking of Ivanka.
What do you think about Trump's family?
I think this isn't necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's an understandable thing. As human beings, we always feel the need to trust in the people who are kind of closest to us, and that usually tends to be our family. And so Trump kind of having Ivanka and Jared kind of as his advisors is something kind of understandable, having his family there to support him. And I think that isn't something we should be freaking out about. We should be understanding of this going on.
I think that it's not about them just being advisors. It's about the role in which he wants them to take. So he just assigns Jared Kushner to project after project. Jared Kushner is going to be the one to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, according to Donald Trump. This man has had no experience in anything except real estate, and he's being assigned to positions that should be held by people who have experience in those positions. And I think that's really what the concern is, more so than a family member just being an advisor.
Well, in most cases, the people who have these high-level posts don't have that much experience either. It's mostly the career bureaucrats who do most of the work. And the people who are going to be below him, who are going to be doing all the work, are people who've been there for 20, 30 years and who know what's going on. So I don't think that's such a big cause of concern.
So you don't believe that somebody who is in charge of an agency should be somebody who has had experience in that agency. I mean, or doing things of that nature. Except, in the Trump administration, where the head of each of his cabinets and each of his agencies is essentially, they are all essentially, diametrically opposed to the goals of those agencies.
I think that's actually a good thing, because if anything, we should be decreasing the role of the government in our nation right now, and having these people who understand that their departments have overextended is actually a good thing.
Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn has said to been taking Bannon's place as one of Trump's most powerful advisors. And now for the final word. The views expressed in this segment are not necessarily the views of Northwestern University or NNN. They're the views of the Politicat editorial staff. On Friday, the Trump administration announced that it would not be releasing the White House visitor logs to the public, despite public demand that it do so. Press Secretary Sean Spicer defended the decision by saying that the White House is following the, quote, same policy that every administration from the beginning of time has used with respect to the visitors log. That statement is not quite true. While it has not traditionally been policy for presidents to release the names of those who visit the White House, the practice was begun in 2009 by the Obama administration after receiving pressure from advocacy groups. Throughout his presidency, Obama released more than 6 million visitor logs, and the country didn't suffer for it. Yet Donald Trump has come on the record calling Obama, quote, the least transparent president ever. Trump campaigned on the promise of draining the swamp, a catchphrase we now know is used only because it garnered applause from the crowds at his rallies. Nevertheless, millions of people were drawn to him because of this very message, ridding Washington, D.C. of corruption and special interest groups. At its core, this is a noble goal, but that goal must be transparency. That involves the president providing the public with a concise and complete summary of the conversations he's had with world leaders, not just generic platitudes. That involves appointing correct representatives in the State Department and directing Secretary of State to inform the press of foreign relations developments. That involves releasing tax returns like every other presidential candidate. That involves complying fully with any congressional investigation, especially if the administration is as innocent as it claims to be. And that involves releasing visitor logs, because President Obama's decision to do so was a step in the right direction, and it could become a time-honored precedent which would contribute to transparency and reduce the influence of lobbyists and special interests for years to come. But that only happens if President Trump continues this convention. If the president does truly have any intention of fixing D.C., this would be a place to start. And that's our show. Check our Facebook page tomorrow for an exclusive Politicat with the new mayor of Evanston, Steve Haggerty. Thank you to our guests Adam Gross and Dominic Bayer. I'm Fallon Gallagher, and you've been watching Politicat.